Okay, do me a quick favor and close your eyes for just a second. I want you to think back. What is your very first memory? I mean, maybe you're blowing out the candles on a birthday cake, or you're feeling the rough fabric of a car seat in the back of your parents' car, or even just catching a really specific smell from your childhood home. Well, now I want you to realize this kind of unsettling fact. Absolutely everything before that exact moment, your first word, your first step, the very first time you realized you even had hands, is completely gone. You were there, right? You were fully conscious, you were feeling things, but somehow the first 3 years of your existence have been systematically erased. Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer. We are launching a full-blown medical and psychological investigation into the case of the missing memories, also known as infantile amnesia. We're going to look really closely at the science to figure out exactly why we universally forget the single most dramatic period of growth and learning our brains will literally ever undergo. It's a genuine mystery, but you know what? We finally have some answers, and they are absolutely fascinating. Chapter 1: The Missing Early Years. So let's start with the most obvious question here. Were you even experiencing anything worth remembering back then? And the answer is unambiguously yes. Infants are incredibly conscious, highly active processors of their world. Actually, newborns can recognize their mother's voice within just hours of birth, all because they encoded the memory of that sound while they were still in the womb. They show preferences, they process incredibly complex sensory inputs, they respond emotionally. There is definitely someone home from the very beginning. But here's the catch. Memory isn't a recording. The brain doesn't just, hit a record button and save a clean, high-definition video file of your day. It is far, far messier than that. Different elements of a single experience are processed simultaneously in entirely different regions of the brain. The sensory details go to one place, the emotional rush goes somewhere else, and the actual narrative sequence, well, that goes somewhere else entirely. So to create an autobiographical memory, all those scattered pieces have to somehow be stitched together. Moving on to Chapter 2. Inside the infant brain. Let's shift our perspective down a bit to the anatomical level, taking a really close look at the specific neurological structures making this whole memory assembly happen. So, the crucial point here is the hippocampus. This tiny structure deep inside the brain acts as your master memory indexer. Its job is to bind all those scattered emotional and sensory pieces we just talked about into a stable, retrievable package. But in a human infant, the hippocampus is dramatically incomplete. The neurons are there, sure, but the dense, intricate network of connections needed to actually organize those memories hasn't fully formed yet. It's kind of like holding a state-of-the-art camera that doesn't have a memory card installed. The lens works perfectly, the processor's running hot, but there is absolutely nowhere for the footage to go. But a missing memory card is really only part of the story here. As a baby grows, they experience something called neurogenesis. This is an explosive, nonstop generation of brand new neurons inside the hippocampus, happening at a rate that simply does not happen in adults. And all these new neurons need to wire themselves into the existing network, right? Well, that integration process is highly disruptive. It constantly destabilizes the existing connections. Think of it like a chaotic library that's adding hundreds of new shelves every single day. Books are being thrown in way faster than they can be sorted, and the shelves literally keep moving around. Basically, the infant brain trades memory consolidation for massive learning capacity. You were learning faster than any adult ever could, and the biological cost of that incredible speed was forgetting everything. Which brings us to Chapter 3, Language and the Self. Okay, so we've looked at the anatomical hardware, but now let's move over to the psychological side of this investigation to find the third missing component. Consider this pretty profound concept. Without language, there's no story. Without a story, there's no narrator. Autobiographical memory, the ability to say, I remember when this happened to me, deeply requires language as its scaffolding. You literally need words to construct the narrative of a self moving through time. And we know this is true because studies show bilingual children actually have their earliest memories anchored in the specific language they used at the time. Plus, children who learn sign language as their first language show the exact same amnesia patterns as hearing children. So it's the cognitive system of language itself that builds the I who remembers. And this brilliantly illustrates the perfect storm of forgetting, what we call the amnesia triad. First up, we have hippocampal immaturity, which essentially blocks the initial saving of the files.
Second, explosive neurogenesis, which is constantly rewiring the biological filing system. And third, the complete absence of language, meaning there is no narrator to anchor the story. These three simultaneous biological and psychological factors combine perfectly to create that near total window of infantile amnesia we all experience.
Let's look at Chapter 4. Are your memories real?
Now that we actually understand why we forget, let's pivot to a major psychological twist. It's time to challenge that very earliest memory you conjured up at the beginning of this explainer. Get ready for a slightly uncomfortable truth about memory reconstruction. Let's walk step by step through how your brain actually fabricates false memories. Step 1, you see an old photo of yourself at, say, your second birthday. Step 2, over the years, you casually hear a family story about how you smashed your face into the cake. Step 3, your brain takes those external clues and builds a vivid mental representation of that event. And finally, step 4, eventually your brain misfiles that mental representation right alongside your actual, genuine memories. Suddenly it feels experiential. It feels completely indistinguishable from reality, but it's actually a reconstruction fabricated entirely by your brain from outside inputs. Wild, right?
This whole reconstruction process explains why memory onset varies so wildly among different people. Memory is fundamentally a social skill. Cultures that engage heavily in collaborative reminiscing, like parents constantly asking their kids, "Hey, what did we see at the park today?" They tend to produce children with earlier autobiographical memories because that skill is being actively practiced. Furthermore, the brain's amygdala, which is basically our emotional alarm system, develops much, much earlier than the hippocampus. Because of that, significant stress or frightening emotional experiences can leave deep, lasting traces. The emotion remembers the experience, even when the narrative story didn't survive at all. Chapter 5. Building the Operating System. Let's shift our focus for a minute to the massive, unseen developmental work happening right behind the scenes during an infant's downtime. 16 to 18. That is the staggering number of hours a newborn sleeps every single day. And they aren't just resting. They spend a massive amount of this time in highly active, REM-like states. For decades, researchers honestly thought this was just a quirk of early development. But now, we understand that memory consolidation happens during sleep. This massive amount of rest is dedicated entirely to consolidating the absolute foundational patterns of learning. Now, what's really interesting about this is the crucial realization it brings us to. The infant is installing the software, not saving individual files. They are building the core operating system that everything else in their entire life will run on. Early experiences are being processed into structural architecture rather than narrative stories. Think about it. You don't explicitly remember learning how to read a human face for emotion, or learning that gravity exists. Those incredibly complex capabilities were installed deeply into your hardware during those long 18-hour sleep cycles. Chapter 6. The Memories You Kept. Let's see how this all builds into the profound realization of why this biological amnesia actually matters to you today. We're left with a pretty stark contrast in our hardware. On one side, we have explicit memory. This is the narrative story you can consciously tell about your life, and as we've learned, infantile amnesia erased those completely. But on the other side, we have implicit memory. These are the emotional reflexes and calibrations living deeply in your nervous system. If you were consistently comforted when you cried as a baby, your body learned biologically that distress is temporary. If you were ignored, your body learned the world is unpredictable. Those implicit memories, those default nervous system calibrations and attachment styles, they survive the amnesia completely intact. And this leaves us with what psychologists call the invisible inheritance. The default expectations of the world that were handed to you by your caregivers, who, by the way, received them from their caregivers, are quietly running your adult life right now. These implicit emotional reflexes and attachment patterns are transferred across generations without any explicit story attached. You forgot the specific childhood experiences for sure, but you kept every single one. But hey, before we get too intimidated by all of that, remember this absolutely fundamental truth. The brain is plastic. Early patterns are highly influential, yes, but they are not destiny. And this is the truly liberating side of infantile amnesia. Because there is no explicit fixed narrative tied to these implicit patterns, they can be rewritten. Through safe relationships, consistent new evidence, and therapy, you can actively update those old calibrations. Your earliest years provided the starting position, but they absolutely do not have to dictate your finish line. Which brings us to the end of today's explainer and to a rather profound philosophical question I want to leave you with. If the very foundation of who you are was built from experiences you cannot physically access, who was really running the show? I mean, think about those deeply rooted intuitions you have, those sudden fears, those automatic responses you rely on every single day. They all come from a chapter of your life that is completely invisible to your conscious mind. Thank you so much for joining me on this structured journey into the hidden mind. Keep questioning the things you think you know, and I'll see you next.